So CrowdStrike stock has been getting pummeled. We're kind of sitting at some relative high, and this part in the chart where it was trading a bit sideways here, this was right going into the weekend, and then after what happened over the weekend became apparent that this was just worldwide and kind of crazy. Huge drop. Then we've been seeing the fallout, huge drop again. I was discussing this with a friend of mine that's in insurance, and he said likely CrowdStrike is liable for a substantial amount of damages on this. It's the kind of thing where this likely isn't covered by cybersecurity insurance unless you have a very particular errors and omissions type policy. So some people might be covered, but particularly for Delta, these guys just got rocked by this. Delta was highly using Windows, pretty much was all in on CrowdStrike for doing their, cybersecurity, and people have just been stranded for days and days. Thousands and thousands of flights have been canceled. I think it was something like 5,000 to 6,000 flights have been canceled. And so this isn't just like long lines. This is people just having to live at the airport because they can't get any other flight out. They can't get a rental car. There's, a dearth of hotels available. So people are pretty much just forced to live in the airport, stand in lines that are, half a mile to a mile long. And the only thing customer service seems to be able to do is to book them on a standby on some other flight, which likely will get canceled. One other piece of information that came out regarding this is the chief security officer, Shawn was apparently selling CrowdStrike shares just before this went down. I don't know if that's correlated at all, but there's still some kind of tone deafness from both George Kurtz and Shawn regarding this situation. Still very interesting that all this happened, but to me, I don't see a trial run for any kind of a internet shutdown. I still just see this as CrowdStrike pushed a very, very unfortunate piece of bad code. It probably speaks to their lack of quality internally, or maybe some other processes that failed. But likely the outcome of this, in my opinion, is that there's a substantive amount of liability that's going to go CrowdStrike's way. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Delta just, going full force at CrowdStrike because they're having to deal with the aftermath of this when they were working with a trusted partner. So it's like, here's one more, tweet kind of talking about this where 6,000 flights canceled, 163 million and climbing. This number seems really low. I don't know where they got that estimate from. And just one last thing to kind of throw fuel to the fire. Kramer still just calling it, man. This dude, every time he says something, it's the opposite. So inverse Kramer still 100% rolling. Good morning, Lucas.
Good morning. And who was it? Who was it that we heard that said that they worked with Jim Kramer early on, and they thought he was brilliant? Do you remember? Can't come to mind, but I don't follow Jim Kramer except when a disaster like this happens, and then I wonder if he called something in favor of it leading into it. So might be a little bit of confirmation bias there, but Delta's problem in Atlanta. I can't understand why after 3 days they aren't getting flights out. They're canceling all their flights.
They're heavily dependent on Windows. The requirements for remediating this issue is you have to physically walk up to like all kinds of machines. And the way that companies have been transitioning their IT to being fully remote or offshore means that the amount of boots on the ground personnel that they have in any particular location that's capable of doing this is small. And so their ability to fix this is really constrained just due to personnel, because mostly in IT, and this falls into the general basket of IT operations is who would have to deal with this situation. That staff just keeps dwindling. Like, that is a cost center that companies pretty much don't want anymore. And so if you have something like this where you have to walk physically to each machine and you're very invested in both Windows and CrowdStrike, dealing with this situation is monumentally difficult. And I sympathize with Delta. It's not, I don't think it's due to Delta's incompetence. I think it's more due to they're one of the major airlines that was a heavy Windows user and bought in on CrowdStrike as being their security vendor. And that's just the fallout. If you were using those two types of things, then you got hit the hardest by this. I think Southwest didn't get hit at all, and I don't think they really use Windows.
I think that they were using Windows 95. I saw in one report. Maybe that was a joke. I didn't. I didn't.
That was a joke, man. 85 has been discontinued for a long time.
Well, I wouldn't. I would have believed it. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
With
except for the thing about Windows is it has a ton of vulnerabilities. So if you're not running some of the most latest patches, you're in danger.
well, perhaps they were running something on an older language, something even older than Windows 95. That I don't know. Anyway, we do know Southwest is still going. Other air carriers are still going. I guess the thing that I see when I see Delta is I don't know why they aren't pushing out their flights and telling their customers that they need to mail their baggage. It's carry-on baggage only. Their flight computers, their communication and flight computers is not what is at hand here. It is their scheduling and their ticketing and their baggage handling systems that are down. So at some point after 3 days of living in an airport, you would think that they would whip out some paper scheduling and pull their baggage crews and start checking IDs manually and getting people on flights and getting them to their destinations and canceling scheduled flights in the future until they get this fixed, but at least taking care of the people in the airports.
It sounds easy. I don't know what their systems are, how interconnected they are, if that's even possible. They might have to deal with some amount of regulations. I noted that the feds are getting very upset about this. I don't know if you saw any posts related to that, but the federal, what is it, Transportation Authority, the FTA, they're looking at this situation and saying you are in big trouble for this.
When I travel in the United States, I'm always like mind blown at how inefficient our system is and how it needs to be improved. If you're in South America, there like so let's talk about bus routes. It's interesting that all you have to do is buy a bus, and I don't. In some places, you bid on a route. In some places, there are licenses that they give out for routes. But however it is, there's no notion of reservations. Like you show up at the bus stop and you wait for the bus to come, and there might be 6 buses in a row, but I've just always been surprised that the amount of time that I've spent waiting on canceled flights and for dealing with unexpected travel interruptions is 4 to 6 fold in the United States with our expectations of reservations and a smooth travel experience. So to me, this whole reservation scheduling is antiquated, and we need something new. And I bring that up also because when Argentina's aviation carrier there put their ticketing system on blockchain, I thought how interesting it will be if you can sell and resell your tickets leading up to it. And it gets the aviation company out of the business of reservations because they do really hate that. They don't like doing security, and that's why Department of Homeland Security was created. They don't like dealing with ticketing. They like flying aircraft, and they make a lot of money on fuel futures. So, what you got there? Half of Delta's IT systems are window based.
I mean, my speculation is just confirmed. I was just pulling up a few sites and reports. This one's directly from the CEO on Delta's news hub, and I mean, it's exactly what I said. It's just each one requires manual repair. They're heavily invested in Windows. It's very unfortunate for Delta. They just picked a vendor that happened to give them a really, really difficult problem. And here's here's the transportation secretary, Pete. I don't even know how to pronounce that dude's name. The Buttigieg. Um,
Buttigieg.
yeah, he said they're looking into it, but I don't know what there really is to say about it. Yeah, there's complaints. Like, who's not going to complain? You're stuck in an airport for days on end. It's no fun sleeping in the airport for multiple days. Can you imagine being camped at the airport for 4 days? Sounds awful.
I can certainly imagine being camped at the airport for 2 days, but let's not get into that story. Um, have you seen also that the voting systems in Arizona are down and they are in the middle of a primary?
I thought that the election machines were not connected to the internet. What's up with that?
What? I don't.
Haven't they repeatedly told us that those machines are not connected to the internet, and that's why they can't get hacked? That's why our elections are safe?
I mean, and things that when we saw CrowdStrike go down, you told me that it was involved in a lot more systems than just aviation systems. And I especially feel for people who are stuck in an airport because again, I've spent 48 hours sleeping. But what about the systems that we're not talking about as much? The voting systems really raises my eyebrows. I was dubious of the concerns that people had about voting machines to begin with, but the more and more that I see that the security upgrades are not made on them, that they're handled by county commissioners and people who do not have any basis in a technological background, and then to make claims like they're not reliant on an internet connection, and yet here we have a technological breakdown that shows us that they certainly are.
Well, this is clear evidence that the voting systems are connected to the internet, that there are states that are using CrowdStrike. It should not be hard to put two and two together if somebody was sufficiently motivated to dig deeper on this and say, okay, Arizona was clearly using machines that are connected to the internet. If these statements have been made that they're not, and now we can prove that they are, and then go dig in the budget of the state, and if there's significant payments to CrowdStrike, I would say that's grounds for further investigation and tracking this down. But I don't know, Lucas, you might want to pass this on to your friends at whoever that may be interested in going deeper on this, because this certainly says that CrowdStrike was involved in the problem that's happening here, and it could be repeated in other places for sure.
Well, those people who are already concerned about it, the MAGA and America Mission crowd are they're screaming "I told you so" right now. So
Why are they taking this tack to like go and look at the budget and say who else is paying CrowdStrike?
well, I was just wondering as you were saying that, is it the voting machine system that has a deal with CrowdStrike, and that's not something necessarily that they see, but they should have access to those records and be able to find that out. Um,
I
you
mean,
know,
you're right. It might be that way. That's a good point. Maybe it's not the state that's paying CrowdStrike directly, but rather the voting system that's partnered up with CrowdStrike, so they deliver a machine. CrowdStrike is pre-installed on that machine. Could be.
well, and that's what I'm more to suspect that is happening because you submit uh, a request for proposal or whatnot. You put out a request for proposal as a county, as a county commissioner. and then you just look at all of them and you say, oh, look, this company makes voting machines. It's this dollar amount. It's this much for support. Let's go with this one. They don't. I doubt that they do a lot of digging behind that. And our democratic governments everywhere, their favorite solution for picking a policy is to look over their shoulders and say, is so and so doing it? Is the town next door doing it? Is the county next door doing it? Oh, they're doing it. Must be great. Let's do that too. So you could see how something like CrowdStrike um, Foundation, which also is promising security, which is promising. I mean, the notion of it, the narrative of it, is that it's adding to the security of the Windows system. Um, People might not have question as to what it was actually doing or who had access to it. The other thing that I saw after the CrowdStrike break was that it was implicated in the DNC hacks, in the DNC email hacks. And not only that, but I don't know if it was the CEO or the CFO of CrowdStrike that liquidated 4,000 shares leading into, what was it, 2 days before this?
Yeah, I just had that on the screen.
Yeah, so 2 days before
It's this guy. It's I think it was in this post right here. Look, see, here's this guy talking about it. So the chief security officer sold 4,000 shares.
And well, let's look at the bottom of that. Is an FBI veteran with 24 years with the FBI. And again, we've known that many government systems were also hit by this security breakdown. And I would wonder if if it were intentional, or if it was somebody trying to manipulate and use CrowdStrike to gain access to sensitive, important government information. We are at a time whenever there are many countries at war. There are countries that rely on technological solutions for their defense, and getting through those, being able to shut those down and to attack someone is probably is something that they have teams of internet nerds trying to do. So, because you talk about how basic the error is with regards to the patch or the update that CrowdStrike pushed out, and also the timing of it seems um, as I mean, wouldn't they normally be doing this on a weekend and not on a weekday? Or is
It's generally accepted practice to not push out an update like this leading into a weekend, because if you have a problem, then it means everybody's got to work the weekend. So the generally accepted practice is you never push software updates anywhere close to the end of a week. So if you want to push a software update, you're going to do that on a Monday. Now, what they actually pushed was an update to what's supposed to be a detection part of the system, so that, like, it should have been innocuous. Like, it should not have been the kind of a thing that would take stuff down. So I don't know why it's taken so long for CrowdStrike to tell us what exactly went wrong here. I mean, forensically, if I were to have to go in there and look at this, I could probably tell you in like 3 or 4 hours, if I had full access to their systems and personnel were being forthright, we could figure it out in like half a day, like what exactly went wrong, because they have some automated process that's responsible for this. And so if you just start tracing it back, it's like, okay, well, what went wrong? We pushed this update. Well, what's one stream up from that? What's one stream up from that? You just keep digging and digging until you find what went wrong. And you should be able to do that in a matter of hours. The fact that days have gone by and we really don't have anything except for platitudes and the briefest of discussions, to me points to CrowdStrike probably found something pretty damning, and they don't want to talk about it because it's going to increase their liability. Follow the money. That'd be my suspicion, is that somehow this points really badly at their internal processes, and because of that, if you look at their terms of service, likely they tripped one of the lines there that says, I think that there's a certain amount of CrowdStrike's EULA says we're not responsible, but there's probably some line that says they are responsible in certain types of situations. And my guess is that they probably tripped that and they don't want to admit it because otherwise they're potentially on the hook for all these damages and things that have been going wrong with the companies that used them. And that could mean a substantive amount of lawsuits that might be coming CrowdStrike's way.
Well, if they go bankrupt, they go bankrupt, and they can't pay anybody. Could you? Because when this first surfaced, I didn't necessarily understand that it didn't affect every Windows machine, and that this was a service that users of fleets of computer systems went out and purchased to add to the security of their system. And it operates underneath the operating system, Microsoft. Is it because of vulnerabilities associated with Microsoft, or because their response time in patching or fixing security vulnerabilities? Why is it that groups, whether it be county voting systems, or aviation companies, or other government institutions, why are they going out and purchasing CrowdStrike to begin with? And why is it not? Why does nobody that has an Apple Macintosh, whatever, or a Linux machine, is it not necessary? Do they have a better response to fixing security vulnerabilities, or is it because those operating systems are built differently?
It's the latter. It's because the operating systems are built differently. Microsoft has been notoriously vulnerable to a variety of different attack vectors. And so what the reason you go after something like CrowdStrike is because it can do advanced threat detection. So it runs at a really low level and it's monitoring a lot of what's happening in the operating system, and it's looking for abnormal behavior. Because it's running at such a low level, it can look at a lot of what's happening in the operating system. It's effectively functioning like a piece of the operating system, and it gets signatures from CrowdStrike. So these signatures say, if we see something that looks like this, it's likely to be this attack vector, it's likely to be this malware, this virus, or whatever. And then it has some abilities to help contain it or allow your IT staff to isolate that machine or shut the machine down so that the infection doesn't spread or that you don't get exfiltration of data or secrets or what have you. Now, the real question is, why does a company like CrowdStrike even need to exist, right? Like, why doesn't Microsoft just do this themselves if they know their operating system is vulnerable and that they need this sort of threat mitigation? They could build it themselves. They could do it. I mean, it's not like Microsoft isn't a multi-trillion-dollar company at this point with all this AI tech. Like, why can a company like CrowdStrike even exist as a bolt-on? And why would you put your trust in the hands of a third-party entity after you've already put your trust in Microsoft? So I don't know the answers to those questions, but apparently they've built a product and enough trust with the customer base that they've got that they were operating and gaining a substantial amount of money. And I don't know, like they've got contracts, and it seems like they were doing pretty well for quite a while as far as the stock price, and I would imagine that reflects their revenue.
And do you think is you said Linux and Mac OS are built differently?
Well, they're
Um,
essentially the same. I mean, Mac became Linux when Steve Jobs decided to take them into the world of the next operating system. Your Mac is essentially a BSD variant, so a lot of the code, it just is Linux. Like, you are running a Linux machine if you're running a Mac. That's the way it's been, I don't know, for a decade or more.
is Linux that close? I know that Linux was based off of Unix.
Yeah,
And
they're both. So Unix and Linux are a family of operating systems all based off of the same ancestor. It's like, I think Xerox Spark was probably the granddaddy of this, that the idea of Unix. And so Linux was Linus Torvalds variant of Unix, and he open sourced it and made it so that anybody could run it. I think prior to that, if you wanted to run a Unix operating system, it was something you had to pay for. And so that was the differentiation between Linux and Unix. Was Linux was free and open source and you could just run it. And that's where, Red Hat stepped in and said, hey, well, we're willing to provide support for this open source operating system. So if you want to run this in your enterprise, run your system off of this, your company, then we'll provide you support and you can pay us for help, but otherwise you don't have to pay for the operating system.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Unix was from Xerox. Maybe I haven't paid that much attention, but that's interesting because Steve Jobs took the idea of the mouse and the GUI from Xerox whenever he started the first Macintosh operating system to begin with. Also know BSD.
Hugely influential company, 100%.
Well, and they I think part of that founding narrative is that Xerox thought those were clunky and they preferred to use the command line because they'd already memorized all the commands and they thought that was just a lot faster to communicate with the machine. Also, BSD, and I know very little about the BSD versus Linux and Unix and all these, but I do know it's Berkeley software development. It was a Berkeley graduate student project. So, and I did not realize that. I knew the Mac OS X had been developed based off of the Unix kernel, but I didn't realize that they had specifically been using BSD's fork of it. So that's interesting. I guess the other question that I have is why, especially when it comes to public or government systems, why are they not using the Linux variant? Because of the nature of, I don't know, open source, higher security, higher standards of security. Is the security there because it's got such a smaller market share or number of users that use it, or is it real?
To ask that question again, is what real? The amount of people that are using Unix or Linux?
Well, the narrative of, again, going back to Macintosh and OS X, whenever OS 10, whenever they started, it said it doesn't have viruses because nobody uses it. Why would
No, that's definitely not the case. It's a more hardened operating system, and it's just like harder to attack it because Unix has some ways that it runs that is different from Windows. So many of the real vulnerable parts of the operating system are gated behind admin access, and so there are things about the way that the Unix operating system functions that's fundamentally different from Windows, and it's some of those fundamental differences that allows Windows to be more easily attacked. So they're just so different that I'd say the attack vector and the way that you can write malware for Windows was such an easier place to do it, and because Windows was so ubiquitous during the time when these attack vectors were first determined to be in existence, and they've never fundamentally been mitigated in a way that would allow for us to be out of the world that Windows is continuously an attack surface. It still is used quite a lot, like more than I would have ever anticipated. Still widely used operating system, shockingly.
Well, I use it. I and
You're a
I'm
Windows user.
no. I thought you said Linux. No, I use Linux. I
No,
use
no, no.
Linux.
I was saying shockingly how much Windows is still used. Um, there's a lot of people using Linux, and definitely a lot of people running Mac. I don't know what the breakdown is. We should take a look. Let me Google it.
Yeah, see if you can find it. I people ask me to help with their Windows machines, and I just offer to install Linux on it for them. And then they look at me with shock and horror and think that they're not going to be able to understand the difference. And it's not all. Anyway, I'm surprised that more people don't use Linux, especially whenever I try to use Windows these days, and it's uh, it, it's clunky. You have to pay for everything. everything. You can't even convert a HEIC photograph to a JPEG without it sending you to some store somewhere. So, but let us know whenever you find the number, if you find the info on the users of them. But let's also, on the
Well,
heels of that.
I found it quite quickly here, no difficulty. And on our favorite Wikipedia, so Linux kernel is most widely used operating system, 42% of the global market. Windows is 28, iOS 18, Mac OS with a Linux kernel at 6, Linux desktop an abysmal 1.2. So when we talk about Linux kernel, I think this is mostly talking about back-end systems. So, oh no, wait, this is talking about Android. So
Yeah, and
Android is the most
we didn't mention, yeah,
OS.
that Android and Google were based off of Linux too. But
Yeah, so it looks like, Android being the primary mobile OS, and then Windows, this is got to be mostly desktop and corporate. So Windows is still top dog if you exclude mobile.
amazing. Um, well, speaking of top dog, let's talk about Joe Biden.
Yeah, let's talk about Joe Biden.
Has he tweeted out today? Are we you
Well, let's start with this. Why are the flags flying half mast?
wow, I didn't I hadn't seen that. How
I
old is
mean,
that?
this only happens in very specific situations, right? And isn't there a defined rationale for when the flags can fly half mast?
I do believe so. Maybe that's for Sheila Lee Jackson. I did notice that Sheila Lee Jackson, who was a beloved member of Congress, passed away from Houston. She's from Houston. I know that she passed away. I've seen several. So it may be in honor of Sheila Lee Jackson. Before we jump to conclusions, that would be my first guess because I know she was a very influential representative who served for quite some time. Um, but it could be something else. I I yesterday we talked about the letter, the signature, the revelation of Joe Biden's withdrawal from the Democratic candidate consideration or race, and throwing in his support for Joe Biden. I mean, for Kamala Harris. Did you happen to see or hear the?
Well, I think I pulled up the policy.
Well, does it say anything? Is it what does it say? Scroll down through there. Let's see it.
Okay, here it is, the flag code. When flown at half staff, it's just saying it should. Okay, here it is. Process for ordering the flag to half staff. Only the President of the United States can order the U.S. flag to fly half staff. Only the mayor of District of Columbia. So, all right. I don't know what that means. That's pretty much saying who can do it.
Well, there was probably the Biden administration probably put out a notification to fly it for Sheila Lee. I did see. I looked up on X and I did see that there are reports that it is for Sheila Lee Jackson.
Got a link on that?
I put it over in our private chat.
All right.
But that notwithstanding, we have not seen physically Joe Biden. Kamala Harris gave a speech yesterday in which she was supposedly talking to Joe Biden, but it doesn't sound like a natural conversation. Can you play this? I'll mute myself if you'll play this because I want you to hear it. I don't know if you listened to it prior to this.
All right, sure, let's play it.
Talking every day. It is to hear our president's voice. Joe, I know you're still on the call, and we've been talking every day. You guys heard it from Doug's voice. We love Joe and Jill. We really do. They truly are like family to us, and we do. Everybody here does.
It's mutual.
I knew you were still there. You're not going anywhere, Joe.
I'm watching you, kid. I'm watching you, kid. I love you.
I love you, Joe. Oh.
So she slips up and says recording, right?
I don't know if she said recording, but I do. I do know that she says that it was probably Doug who said "I love that we love you." She certainly doesn't say that. That was what I thought was funny in that clip. But then um, the conversation does not seem to me to be natural. The response from Biden was, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he doesn't feel good. Maybe he's bedridden, and that's why he doesn't want to be seen. We have seen reports from his doctors that he's doing fine. His lungs are clear. Um, I forget which senator or congressman yesterday said that they wanted to call into question Joe Biden's doctors and dig in on them as to what they were sharing with regards to the health of the president. Um, this is fascinating, and it gets into a very old question of state with regards to the king. If we elect the president and they can do anything, and that's a conversation that we recently had with Trump versus the United States and presidential immunity. But part of the quid pro quo is they're supposed to give up some of their privacy or a lot of their privacy, and we should know if they are having health issues, if they are sick with COVID, if they are having degenerative age related issues or anything of the sort. And I don't know that that's been shared, and it's probably we're probably going to hear things about the privacy of the president, HIPAA, medical privacy. It's his body, not his mind, but his mind must live inside his body, and the United States does have an interest in his health. So,
What's going on with this? Where there's some sort of a transfer of power to the Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of State. Is this common? What's the deal here? Did
I
you
mean,
check up
the
on this?
president should be delegating authority. Maybe it's because maybe it's because at the point of deciding that he's not going to be running for another 4-year term, that he wants to focus on other things as he closes out his term. I'm not sure. I don't think it's unprecedented. I think that we have an expectation for the president to be delegating authority to especially his cabinet secretaries. So
yeah, I mean, usually you've got some strong historical perspective, so I guess nothing immediately comes to mind that you've seen precedents for this.
I mean, it's more so the timing with this, with the lack of seeing, with not seeing President Biden make the announcement himself, like using like the most verifiable, trusted source. Like, why was the announcement that he was not going to be running in the future, and even more so that he was getting behind Kamala Harris as the presumptive Democratic nominee? Why was that not done on television? And why was it not done with the press corps that follows him, and especially with the networks that share or that have a license to use public airwaves? it would seem to me that
Well, here's absolutely breaking news. Okay, here we go. This from the POTUS X account again.
well, this is from the POTUS account. The previous announcements were made from @Joe Biden, his personal account.
Right. That was the announcement that he wasn't going to run again. But I think that there's been some other stuff from the POTUS account that's come out. Maybe we could even just click on it and see what else has come out.
Well, what lies?
Yeah, because look, there have been a bunch of tweets that have happened, since he's gone into recluse here. But
Yeah,
I don't think I don't think that the POTUS actually mans this account, right?
no, I don't think so either. But let's go back to that latest and breaking news. How when came out 30 minutes ago. Tomorrow,
It's
I
right
will
at the
address.
top.
Yeah,
It's the pinned one. Yeah.
I don't know what clause in here jumps out to you, but to me, on what lies ahead and how I will finish the job for the American people.
This phraseology, "finish the job," has been used several times.
Well, he doesn't
This has
say.
been said repeatedly.
He doesn't say, and how I will finish out my term. On what lies ahead, there is perhaps there will be a revelation as to his health. Maybe he really did have COVID, and that was quite a fight. We know it affects elderly people, and it's harder for them to recover. I don't know. I'm definitely going to be tuning in tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Man, and I have to wait over 24 hours for this. So uh, I don't know, because I wondered upon his announcement. It would seem to me that the best chance that the Democrats would have, if they are going to run with Kamala Harris, and I don't want to get into Kamala Harris. I don't want to get into um, the irony of the Democratic Party not democratically electing their candidate. I think that is that's their own problem. If Kamala Harris is to be the nominee for the Democratic Party, um, come hell or high water, it would seem to me that having served as president for the rest of the term might benefit her. And if President Biden is amenable to that, or really truly has health concerns that have been concealed or are growing, he might be looking to secure her election by resigning and giving her, the lame duck last of his presidential term, to take over the wheel. So um, that will be interesting. I do you have any expectations as what's going on here?
Honestly, if I would have found out that Biden was dead, I would not have been surprised. We'll see. If he comes out and he speaks kind of mumbling the way he had been, that would indicate to me that this is legit. Because I don't see how he would turn around his mental decline in a short period of time. Like, I don't know how you get COVID and come out and you're hale and hearty. If he comes out and still looks frail and very weak and suffering from dementia, okay, then I'll probably think that this is legitimately Joe Biden. But there's been some really strange stuff that's been happening out there with respect to, videos of Joe Biden just not consistent with ways that he's looked in the past. And so I don't know if these conspiracy theories are real about guys out there with masks on or what, but it's just some wildly inconsistent behavior in different videos that I've seen of Joe Biden. But if he looks like what he did in the debate, frail, suffering from dementia, mumbling, not capable of really carrying on, then I would consider that he's not dead, and that's really him. But if he looks like, 2016 Joe Biden, I don't know. That would give me a real cause for concern.
Well, we just had the congressional hearing of the House Oversight Committee pull before them the head of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, yesterday, and there was
Lots of interesting stuff in that.
I was going to say a remarkable amount of grandstanding there. I get incredibly tired of.
Well, you've told us before that that's all that stuff is blustering, grandstanding, right? I mean, there's nothing else really that can come from it.
Well, we would have known it was serious if anyone had threatened to defund Social Security, and the only piece, Social Security, the Secret Service, all these SS words.
Yeah, I wasn't connecting the dots when you first said that. So thanks for the clarification. Defunding Social Security, that would have been an interesting tack.
Members of Congress have their own retirement plans, so it doesn't affect them. Maybe they'll do it anyway, but perhaps leading into a threat of older candidates. But no, if any of the members of the House or the Senate were actually serious, they would be keeping their threats in line with the powers that have been granted to them, and they have the power to fund the executive office as well as the administrative agencies that are under the executive, including the Secret Service. So if any of them had, these strongly worded letters demanding that the president fire somebody, or that the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security fire somebody, that's I mean, does this if in Delta, does the CFO, do we demand that the CFO fire the head of tech? No, we turn to the CEO, and the leader of the Secret Service answers to the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and that secretary answers to the president. So
why isn't the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security being dragged before Congress? Wouldn't that be the next step? Is that happening?
I mean, if Congress was actually serious about getting to those answers and calling forth, then they would be summoning President Biden, as well as Secretary Mayorkas, as well as Kim Cheadle. But they are not neither the House nor the Senate is a courtroom. The limitations on the speaking time and the political nature, the highly charged political nature of a rulemaking body is very different than one that is interested in finding matters of fact or assigning blame, and that's a very separate branch of our government. That is the judiciary. So if Congress, I mean, one step more than calling Kim Cheadle, because that was just one great, a great politician never misses a fiasco or a fire in order to call attention to themselves and their issues, and that's what.
Well, wait now. So this already occurred, right? I just thought, all right, let's just check up and see what happened here. So it looks like Chairman Green already demanded public testimony from Mayorkas. So
in demanded testimony, but look at the fine print. Invited the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, invited him, and that speaks to the lack.
Well, hold on. Now this is exactly what happened with Cheadle, right? They invited her, and then she wouldn't come, so they subpoenaed her, right?
But even with the subpoena and the holding in contempt and holding in inherent contempt, the Congress, the House nor the Senate were designed to have authority over the bodies of the elected people who sit in those bodies, or originally the notion that they could subpoena anybody and drag somebody in before them was antithetical to the agreement of the Articles of Confederation and later the Constitution. And even the federal court system, that was a change that we saw amongst the early years of the Supreme Court. The notion that they could that they could drag anyone before them, I would say it doesn't become an accepted precedent until after the Civil War, and after the decisions that are handed down ex parte leading into the Civil War are numerous. And ex parte means, like the Roger Taney, so the Supreme Court, the head of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, called Lincoln into the courtroom, and Lincoln didn't come. Lincoln just said, "I don't care what you say. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to suspend habeas corpus in the United States and throw people in jail." And Taney told him he couldn't do that, but Lincoln didn't even bother to show up. That happened with Clement Vallandigham. It happens over and over and over. So here, though, it would be more appropriate, in my mind, for either the Senate to request. So think about Bush v. Gore and the role that the Supreme Court played there. If Congress actually wants to get to matters of fact and blame, then they should be asking the Supreme Court to summon. And this is also where it gets very interesting, because they don't hold trials. If you pay attention to the fine print at the federal level, those are tribunals, not trials. But maybe, and part of the problem here too is, again, like, if the Supreme Court was to actually be able to take control of the bodies of these interested parties, who are they going to rely on? The Department of Justice. And that is all under the executive, there you go, federal tribunals in the United States.
Yeah, well, help us understand this just a little bit more. Like, I always love to learn a bit more, pulling back the covers on how this stuff works. So what's the real difference here between a trial and a tribunal? The tribunal, to me, has the 3 letters TRI, which means of 3 or something. What's the 3 in tribunal?
Well, so going back to the original, like, break in previous judiciary systems in the United States, we were going to have an adversarial system of justice, and there are 3 adversaries that exist to help triangulate and find matters of fact. And those adversaries are the prosecution, the defense, and the judge, and they were supposed to be in front of a jury. If you pull up Oliver Ellsworth and Georgia versus Brailsford, you will find that it was in earlier understandings of what the Supreme Court was going to look like, was that it would emulate the lower courts, and that you would have those 3 advocates for justice who presented a case before a jury. But this is the only case that has ever gone before the Supreme Court that was decided by a jury. And this one goes back to debts and money. All those early cases were about debts and money. Brailsford was a man from England who Georgia owed debts to, and he summoned Georgia before the Supreme Court in order to get that money. So what's the difference between a trial and a tribunal? A trial, you can coerce. You can send the sheriff out to grab by the nape of the neck the parties who are implicated, subpoenaed, summoned as witnesses, summoned for testimony, what have you. But in a tribunal, so one place that we see tribunals is in the military. But in the military, and this also gets very interesting when we think about COVID and some of the soldiers' response. In the military, you ostensibly are taking payment for your body, and so if your body is surrendered to the control of the hierarchy of the military, then they hold tribunals because they control your body, and so that's kind of the legal understanding of why the military holds tribunals, and why the states get to hold trials. Now, and you'll also notice this in federal charges. Notice
so
that
it would have been like Chelsea Manning would have been brought before a tribunal, right, for the WikiLeaks thing?
Yeah, and even I mean, think back to the prisoners at Guantanamo and the argument as to whether they were that they should be subjected to military tribunals or or trials inside the states. And unfortunately, no agreement could be made because what was done to them was extrajudicial by anybody's laws, and so innocent people sit in Cuba 25 years later, 20 years later.
So this was the case, and this is not a trial. This is the tribunal, then, right? Or was there a separate trial brought before as well?
Well, I'm not sure if it was held in the military. The military doesn't hold trials; they hold tribunals. So, and the federal, going back also to, let's say, the distinction between the federal government. You know, the jurisdiction of the federal government is commerce. States own the land and the bodies, according to the original agreements under the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution was supposed to be a editing of the Articles of Confederation. So although some of the norms have shifted in the adoption or the understanding that the Articles of, or the Constitution is our founding document, you know, some of those things are Federalist ideas, as opposed to Democratic Republican ideas of how the Union was to be run. So go back and look at federal charges. Look at a murder case and look at the federal charges. You'll notice that the state charges for murder, murder in the first degree, manslaughter, all these things that touch your body. But if the federal government is to convict with charges relating to murder, they have to convict for conspiracy to commit murder, or conspiracy to commit fraud, or charges that relate to moving information or moving articles around, because their jurisdiction is commerce, specifically commerce that crosses state lines. And so to strengthen their jurisdiction in charges, the federal government is always looking to charge on things that harken back to their jurisdiction, which is commerce, and specifically commerce between states. You know, another thing that I find very interesting, because everyone, you remember the Schoolhouse Rock, and you know, Congress gets together to make a bill. Congress actually gets together to legislate or to decide that they're resolved for something, and then to write that down as legislation. And that resolution that they decide on might be to send a bill to the United States Treasury to fund something, and that is their true power. But they don't write bills, or they don't just write bills. They can write resolutions about anything. They can say, we're resolved for this. Well, their actual power exists in funding things. So it's a false equivalency to say they just write bills, or that's their limitation. I'm just a bill.
There's an update to this too. I think somebody made a more recent one where they talk about how bills get written these days by these entities that are kind of shadowy, and then are presented with thousands of pages that the legislative bodies are expected to read in short order and then vote on, with only their staffers having a chance to parse through some of the relevant sections.
Well, if you think back to the time of Tip O'Neill and the Democratic control of Congress that lasted for so long, the federal government used to have a lot more employees. Staffs of the various representatives were paid, and they wrote these bills, and they were maybe less captured by corporate interests. But part of the anti-federalist tune that Dixiecrats and Republicans, or some Republicans both played, was to strip elected officials of the ability to discern the nuance, in order to try to get them to stop making such convoluted legislation. But whenever they stripped the federal government of the ability to pay for all these staffers, what happened instead was the lobby creeped up, and we saw and this is part of why I am firmly against term limits, because it doesn't solve anything. When you get rid of people who want to come sit at the table, if we enact term limits, then the lobbyists just have more and more power. Now you got me on tangents, and we're rolling on the end of the hour. Anything before we want to close up?
I don't think so. Great discussion as always.
I enjoyed it. See you tomorrow.